East Kilbride, Scotland, the largest town in South Lanarkshire and the country's sixth largest city or town by population. It was also designated Scotland's first new town on the 6th of May 1947. The area lies on a raised plateau to the southeast of Cathkin Braes, about 8 miles southeast of Glasgow and close to the boundary with East Renfrewshire. East Kilbride is twinned with the town of Ballerup in Denmark. Listen to the hometown murder case of Peter Manuel, an American-born Scottish serial killer who was convicted of murdering 7 people across Lanarkshire and southern Scotland between 1956 and his arrest in January 1958, and he's believed to have killed 2 more. Prior to his arrest, the media nicknamed the unidentified killer the Beast of Birkenshaw. Manuel was hanged at Glasgow's prison, and he was the second to last prisoner to die at the Barlinnie gallows. Peter Manuel was born to Scottish parents in New York City. The family moved to Detroit, Michigan, before migrating back to Scotland in 1932, this time to Birkenshaw, Lanarkshire. During his childhood, Manuel was bullied. By the age of 10, he was known to the local police as a petty thief. At the age of 16, he was committed a series of sexual attacks that resulted in him serving 9 years in Peterhead prison. In 1955, he successfully conducted his own defence on a rape charge at Ardee Sheriff Court. Manuel was convicted in 1958 of the murders of 7 people. One case against him was thrown out of court. Another was committed in England and was attributed to him. Anne Kneilands, 17, was killed on the 2nd of January 1956. Kneilands was stalked at the now removed East Kilbride golf course in the Calderwood area, where she was raped and bludgeoned to death with a length of iron. Although the police questioned him after the murder, he would confess to it 2 years later. Manuel escaped arrest when his father gave him an alibi. He was charged with this murder in 1958, but the case was dropped because of insufficient evidence. Marion Watt, 45, Vivian Watt, 16, and Margaret Brown, 41, were killed. Mariam, her daughter Vivian, and her sister Margaret were shot dead in their home in Burnside, Lanarkshire, on the 17th of September 1956. At the time of the murders, Manuel was out on bail for housebreaking at a nearby colliery, and officers in charge of the manhunt for the Watts killer suspected him. However, for a time, the main suspect was Mariam's husband William, who had been on a fishing holiday in Ardshag, but was suspected of driving around 90 miles through the night, faking a break-in his own home and murdering his family and driving back. The ferryman on the Renfrew ferry claimed to have seen him on the ferry during the night, although this was not the most direct route, and a motorist claimed to have passed him on Loch Lomside. Both witnesses picked him out of an identity parade. William Watt was arrested and held on remand in Barlinnie prison, then released 2 months later after the police realised they could not make sense of the case and could not make it stick, and the ferryman seemed confused about the type of car he had driven. The police did not find any serious motive which might lead to Witt murdering his family, although it emerged that a number of affairs during his marriage. Police frogmen searched the Crinnell Canal next to the hotel where Watt had stayed, looking for a murder weapon, bloodstained clothing, but the weapon in another stretch of water further south. It was established that the level of petrol in Watt's car had not fallen during his alleged overnight drive, so the police questioned petrol stations along the route to see if he'd refuelled, and even speculated he might have had a secret cache of petrol and searched the route for it. William Watt remained the suspect until the Smart family murder just a few miles away, when the police realised there was a killer on the loose. At Manuel's trial, the defence argued that Watt had committed these murders. The legal system could come close to a miscarriage of justice in Watt's case, who would very likely have been hanged if convicted, and the evidence of the two witnesses is still not easy to explain even now. However, one possible explanation is that Ferryman was a fantasist who had already seen Watt's picture in the papers, although he claimed to have not to. The other witness admitted that he did not get a clear look at Watt, but identified him based on the way he held his cigarette. Sydney Dunn, 36, was shot by Manuel and killed in Newcastle upon Tyne, a taxi driver, on the 8th of December 1957. Dunn's body was found on moorlands in Northumberland soon after, by which time Manuel had already returned to Lanarkshire. Manuel was never tried for his murder, as it took place in a different legal jurisdiction, but 17 days after he was hanged, a coroner's jury concluded Manuel had murdered Dunn after a button found in Dunn's taxi was matched to one of his jackets. This verdict has been accepted in many accounts of the case, but some doubts have been expressed. There are a few indications that the murderer might have been a local person, or he might have come off as an Irish boat train which had recently arrived at Newcastle station. Two witnesses also spoke that the killer pointed out Manuel as an identity parade, but these identifications were not always decisive. One of these victims initially said that the apparent killer had a local accent, but when it was suggested to him that the killer might come off an Irish boat, he said he had an Irish accent and Manuel had a Scottish accent. Manuel definitively did not attend a job interview in Newcastle 2 days before his murder, but it's not clear that he hung around in the area. He could have gone home to Scotland. Isabella Cook disappeared after leaving her Mount Vernon home to go to a dance at Uddingston Grammar School on the 28th of December 1957. Manuel stalked, raped and strangled her and then buried her in a nearby field. He would later lead officers to the spot where he disposed of her body. As with Dunn's murder 20 days earlier, Cook's disappearance was not initially connected to Manuel. Peter, Doris and Michael Smart, Peter 45, Doris 42 and Michael 10 were shot in their Uddingston home in the early hours of the 1st of January 1958. After the murders, Manuel stayed in the household for nearly a week, eating leftovers from the Hogmanay meal and even feeding the family cat, before stealing some brand new banknotes that Peter Smart had kept for a holiday and taking the family car and dumping it nearby. Manuel gave a lift to this car to a police officer investigating Isabella Cook's disappearance, even telling him that he felt the police were not looking in the right places. Although many police officers were familiar with Manuel and suspected him of carrying out these murders, they were unable to prove his guilt until shortly after they searched the Smart's residence and retraced their movements in the hours before the murder, when 7 £5 banknotes Peter Smart was known to have withdrawn from his bank on New Year's Eve were found to be missing from his residence, and Manuel had discovered to be using these same banknotes to pay for drinks in South East and Glasgow pubs. After the police arrested his father, he confessed to 8 of these murders, but not Dunn, and provided incriminating information only the perpetrator could have known. As panic of the epidemic of murders spread, Lanarkshire police were reinforced by detectives and officers from Glasgow CID. On the 14th of January, police arrived at Manuel's Birkenshaw residence, armed with an arrest warrant, formally charging him with both with the murder of the Smart family and with the breaking and entering in the Uddingston home of a family named McMahon on the 4th of January that year. Manuel had been asleep at the time of the police arrival. As an officer named Andrew Stewart recited the arrest warrant to him, Manuel's father became visibly abusive. Informed he was to be taken to Ballerup police station for further questioning, Manuel replied, quote, "You haven't found anything yet. You can't take me," quote, end quote. Shortly afterwards, he voluntarily left his home in the company of the officers. At 11:10 that evening, Manuel was formally charged with murdering the Smart family and even breaking into McMahon's residence. Manuel was tried for these murders in a sensational trial at Glasgow High Court. In a move that astounded many present, he sacked his lawyer and conducted his defence himself. At one point, William Watt was called as a witness. Recently injured in a road accident, he appeared on a stretcher. Although the judge, Lord Cameron, admitted that Manuel conducted his defence, quote, "with a skill that is quite remarkable," end quote, the killer was unable to convince the jury of his innocence, and he was found guilty of all charges against him, except for that of murdering Anne Kneilands, who had dropped due to lack of evidence. His defence in relation to the Smart killings contained some highly implausible claims that Peter Smart had gone on a spree and killed his family, then killed himself, and that Peter Smart had been a friend of his who had given him keys to the Smart house. On the 11th of June 1958, Manuel was hanged on the gallows at Barlinnie prison by Harry Allen. His last words were reported to have been, quote, "Turn up the radio and I'll go quietly," end quote. Around the time of his trial and execution, some newspapers published claims that Manuel was responsible for several other unsolved murders from the 1950s, but the evidence for this is tenuous at best, and in some cases it is shown that he was in prison at the time. Manuel was the third to last criminal to be executed in Scotland. Anthony Miller followed Manuel onto the Barlinnie gallows in December 1960, and Henry John Burnett was executed at Craigniches Prison, Aberdeen, in August 1968. In 2009, a BBC programme called Inside the Mind of a Psychopath argued that the authorities concluded to ensure Manuel was hanged. Manuel had been arrested only 8 days after the City of Glasgow CID police took over the case, leading to calls for the creation of a national police force. A single Scottish police force was eventually created in 2013. Peter Manuel was the only modern figure in the Chamber of Horrors section of the now defunct Edinburgh Wax Museum on the Royal Mile.